The screams had long since burned away into silence, leaving only the acrid scent of smoke and the crackle of fire devouring wood. The village that once sang with children's laughter and the ring of hammers on iron was now a blackened ruin. In the middle of it all stood a boy barefoot, soot-smeared, clutching the blooded hand of a man who no longer breathed. His name was Eric. He was only 10 when the war came. His father, Joran, had been everything: strong arms, a steady voice, a shield against the world's cruelty. Joran would sit by the fire at night, rough palms scarred from battle but gentle enough to mend toys, and whisper, "The world may break us, son, but never forget we can choose to heal, not to hurt." Those words were the boy's anchor. Until the night they lost everything. The raiders came at dawn. They swept through the village like wolves in a pen of lambs, cutting down men and dragging women screaming into the smoke. Eric saw his father fight, sword flashing, roaring defiance against impossible odds. He also saw the spear that pierced Joran's chest, saw him stumble, fall, and with his last strength clutch his boy close. Blood soaked Eric's tunic as his father whispered his final breath into his ear. "Live, my son, live." The boy did not scream when his father's body went cold. He did not weep when rough hands dragged him away, calling him devil child for the fire that seemed to burn in his eyes. Something inside him cracked like ice under too much weight. His tears dried before they could fall. His heart hardened before it had finished growing. Eric became a shadow in the camps of men. Soldiers mocked him, spat at him, some threw stones, whispering that any child who survived such slaughter without a scar must be cursed. His silence unnerved them. His eyes, too old for his small frame, cut deeper than any blade. When food was scarce, he fought for scraps like a feral thing. When fists beat him down, he rose again, unflinching, until even grown men felt unease around him. Years passed like a blur of fire and steel. The boy who had once held his father's hand became a youth with hands that held only knives. War made him its pupil, teaching him that mercy was weakness, kindness an invitation to be devoured. By 15, Eric's name was spoken in fear. He killed not with the sloppy rage of youth, but with the cold precision of someone who had emptied himself of all but survival. And so they named him the Devil's Child. A monster born from ash and sorrow, who left trails of corpses where he walked. He wore the name like armor, for it kept the world from drawing close enough to hurt him again. He buried the memory of Joran's warm embrace deep, where even he could not find it. But fate is cruel and strange. For even the most hardened blade may one day remember it was once raw steel, shaped by gentler hands. And in the ruin of a conquered city, with his sword still dripping red, Eric's life was about to collide with someone who dared to see the boy still buried beneath the devil. The city had already surrendered, yet the soldiers turned it into a hunting ground. Fire licked the edges of roofs, doors splintered under boots, and cries of the conquered rose into the smoke-choked night. Eric walked among them, blade drawn but face expressionless. To him, this was routine, another place swallowed by war, another chapter in the endless song of blood. Men older than him shouted his name like a war cry. Send the Devil's Child. Let him finish it. And finish it he did. Not because he cared for victory, nor for the banners raised over burning gates, but because killing was the only language the world had ever taught him. His sword bit into flesh, his boots marched through rivers of red, and the people shrank from his shadow as though he carried death itself. When it was over, the victors feasted on stolen wine. They laughed, sang, and groped the spoils of their conquest, but none dared sit close to Eric. He sat at the edge of the firelight, sharpening his blade in silence, his scarred hand steady, his face unreadable. To them, he was a tool, useful, terrifying, untouchable. They feared what lay behind his empty stare, for even in victory, his eyes never softened. And then he saw her. It was by chance, or perhaps the cruel weaving of fate. A small chapel still stood amid the ruins, its stained glass shattered, its altar blackened with soot. Inside, a girl knelt among the rubble, clutching the body of an old priest. She could not have been older than 16. Her hair was matted with ash, her dress torn, but her eyes burned with defiance. When Eric's shadow fell across the chapel doorway, she looked up at him, not with fear, but with fury. "Have you not done enough?" she spat, voice breaking but bold. Will you desecrate even this? The soldiers behind him laughed cruelly. Look at her, shouting at the devil's child himself. Careful, girl, he'll carve that tongue from you. But Eric said nothing. His gaze lingered not on her defiance, but on the way her hands trembled as she shielded the priest's body, as though her own frail form could defend it from him. Something in that image struck him, a half-buried memory of his own hands clinging to his father's body in the burning village. For a moment, the coldness inside him wavered. Kill her, boy, one of the men jeered, tossing him a dagger as if it were a game. Prove the devil's child has no heart. The girl did not move, did not beg. Her eyes bored into his, fierce and unyielding. And for the first time in years, Eric felt his grip falter. The dagger weighed heavy, heavier than any blade he had ever carried. His chest tightened as his father's dying words echoed like a ghost. Live, my son, live. Instead of striking, he turned. The dagger clattered to the ground at his feet. She is nothing, he muttered, his voice like stone. Not worth the steel. The soldiers jeered at his back, but none dared press him further. They had seen what happened to men who tried. That night, as the camp roared with drunken revelry, Eric lay awake, staring at the stars through the smoke. He told himself it was nothing, that sparing one girl meant less than ash in the wind. Yet in the hollow of his chest, a warmth flickered, faint and fragile. He crushed it quickly, smothering it beneath the weight of his armor of rage. But the memory of her defiant eyes would not leave him. For the first time in years, he wondered if the devil within him still remembered what it was to be a child. The army did not linger in the conquered city. They took what they wanted, grain, gold, and bodies, and marched on, leaving rubble in their wake. Eric marched with them, his sword heavy on his back, though heavier still was the image of the girl in the chapel. He told himself it was weakness to think of her, yet at night, when dreams came, he saw not battlefields but her trembling hands shielding the priest. Weeks passed, and war dragged them north. But fate has a way of crossing paths that should never meet. In a border village where prisoners were brought for labor, Eric saw her again. Her hair was shorter now, hacked raggedly, her face smeared with dirt. Chains weighed on her wrists, and she hauled water for the soldiers who mocked her, splashing her, forcing her to spill so they could laugh. When she stumbled, one of them raised a whip. Clumsy little rat. We'll beat the defiance out of you yet. The crack never landed. Eric's hand shot out, gripping the whip midair. The soldier froze, blood draining from his face as the devil's child stared at him with cold, dangerous eyes. She's mine, Eric said flatly, his voice low and final. The man stammered, then backed away, muttering curses under his breath. The others did not question it. Nobody challenged the devil's child. The girl lifted her head, startled. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed swiftly by suspicion. Why, she whispered bitterly. So you can kill me yourself, on your own terms. Eric did not answer. He turned, forcing the guards to hand her over, and led her to a quieter corner of the camp. There, beneath the shadow of a half-collapsed barn, he dropped a canteen of water at her feet. Drink. She stared at him as if he were some strange beast, unsure if it was safer to obey or defy. Her lips cracked, her throat parched, but still she muttered, "What game are you playing?" "None." Her suspicion only deepened. "They say you're the devil's child. That you feel nothing. That you slaughter for joy." His jaw clenched. He almost told her they were right. Almost told her that joy had nothing to do with it, that slaughter was survival, and survival was all he had left. But then he saw again her eyes in the chapel, her hands over the priest's body. Something in him ached, an old wound reopening. "What's your name?" he asked instead. She hesitated. "Alina." "Alina," he repeated, as if testing a word he had long forgotten how to say. It felt strange on his tongue, not like an enemy's curse but something softer, something human. 4 days, Eric watched over her in silence. He kept the cruelest soldiers from her, shielded her from their worst abuses. Alina did not thank him. She did not trust him. Yet she began to notice the smallest things, the way he gave her his share of bread without a word, the way his gaze softened for a flicker when he thought no one saw. One night, when the camp slept, she spoke. "You're not what they say, Are you? He looked at her sharply. You kill, yes. You're ruthless, yes. But I've seen men who enjoy it. You don't. You look empty. Like someone who's forgotten how to live. Eric said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Alina's voice lowered, trembling. What did they take from you? He closed his eyes, and in the darkness saw again his father's face, pale and broken in the firelight. For the first time in years, his breath shuddered. His fingers tightened, not on a weapon, but on the memory of holding Joran's lifeless hand. And though no words left his lips, Alina understood. The devil's child was not born from evil. He was made from loss. War devours everything, villages, crops, fathers, and sons. It spares nothing, not even the silence of night. Yet amid its endless hunger, something fragile stirred between Eric and Alina. She still bore her chains, though he made certain the soldiers never tightened them. She still labored, though he carried twice her load without complaint. Each day, the men whispered when they saw her beside him, whispering that the devil's child had claimed a pet. Some laughed, others sneered, but none dared voice it loud enough for him to hear. To Alina, it felt like standing beside a cliff's edge. At any moment, she might fall or be pushed. Yet slowly, she noticed the cracks in his armor. He never joined the drunken revelry. He never mocked prisoners. When orders came to burn another barn or drag another villager through the mud, his face stayed unreadable, but his hands lingered before the torch was lit, before the blade was raised. One evening, as the sky burned with sunset, she whispered, "Why do you keep me alive?" Eric's gaze drifted to the horizon. "Because you remind me of something I lost." His words sank into her like stones dropped into a still pond, rippling deeper than she expected. But soldiers are wolves, and wolves scent weakness. The captain of the company, a broad man with a scar carved from jaw to ear, noticed Eric's straying. Around the fire he spoke loud, making certain all heard. "The devil's child is softening. He's grown fond of his little dove." Laughter followed, cruel and sharp. Men mimicked him, pretending to cradle babes, cooing mockingly. Yet none laughed too close, for they feared his blade. Still, the seed was planted. Suspicion spread. The captain struck hardest. A dog that grows tame needs breaking. Tomorrow, the girl swings with the rest of the rabble. The camp roared approval. But Eric's blood ran cold. His hand closed on his sword hilt. For an instant, the firelight caught his eyes and the men silenced, remembering why they feared him. The captain smirked, testing the boy's leash. "You object, devil?" The world seemed to hold its breath. Alina's face blanched, though she bit her lip to keep from trembling. She knew one wrong word from Eric and her life would end before dawn. Finally, Eric's voice came, low and deadly calm. "She is mine. Kill her, and I kill you." Silence crushed the camp. No man moved. The captain's grin faltered, yet pride held him upright. "You forget your place, boy. You belong to the war, not to your heart." Eric's eyes burned like coals. "Try me." For a long moment, blades nearly leapt from scabbards. Then the captain spat into the fire, muttering curses, and turned away. "Keep your scrap of meat. But when she betrays you, don't say I didn't warn you." That night, Alina spoke in a trembling whisper. "You risked everything. Why?" Eric looked at her, truly looked. The firelight painted her face, tired, dirt-streaked, but unbroken. And in her, he saw not weakness but something he thought long dead. Defiance. Faith. Innocence. "Because," he said quietly, "the world already took my father. I will not let it take you too." Alina's breath caught. For the first time, she reached out, her chained hand brushing his scarred one. He flinched, as if her touch burned, but he did not pull away. For the devil's child, who had lived years in blood and silence, it was the first time in memory he felt warmth that was not from fire. And it terrified him more than any blade ever could. The soldiers never forgot. Wolves may back down from fire, but they circle again when the flame weakens. From that night onward, Eric felt their eyes on him like daggers. Where once they hailed him as a weapon, now they whispered doubts. The devil's child has gone soft. He has found a leash, and a girl holds it. Alina felt the shift too. Their food grew scarcer, their orders crueler. She noticed how men smiled when they sent Eric on errands that would leave her vulnerable. She learned to stay close, to keep her head low, to avoid the bait they dangled. But the tension coiled tighter, ready to snap. It snapped on a cold dawn when the army broke a village in the hills. Smoke poured from thatched roofs, and cries echoed through the fields. Alina was forced to march with the plunderers, carrying bundles of stolen wheat. Eric fought at the front, blade red, expression as stone-carved as ever. But when he returned to the rear, he saw a scene that froze the blood in his veins. A group of soldiers had cornered Alina against a wall, their grins hungry, their voices dripping venom. Devil's pet or not, she's just another spoil of war. Let's see if he really cares. Let's break her before his eyes. The laughter curdled into screams a heartbeat later. Eric moved like a storm breaking, steel flashing, rage unshackled. His sword took the first man's head clean from his shoulders. The second fell gurgling, his throat opened like a slaughtered pig. The third tried to flee but never made it 3 steps before Eric's blade split him from spine to belly. When it ended, 3 bodies bled into the dirt. Alina, trembling, pressed herself against the wall, wide-eyed. The camp erupted in chaos. Soldiers rushed to the scene, weapons drawn. The captain's roar split the air. Traitor. He kills his own. Devil's child has lost his leash. Eric stood over the corpses, chest heaving, sword dripping red. He met the captain's gaze without flinching. They touched what was mine. The circle of steel around him tightened. A dozen blades glinted, ready to strike. For the first time in years, Eric felt no fear of their steel. His fear was elsewhere, of losing her, of failing her, of watching the world take yet another piece of him. "Stand down, boy," the captain growled. "Or we cut you to ribbons and string the girl beside your corpse." Something inside Eric shifted then, deep and final. For years, he had lived as a weapon, wielded by others. For years, he had borne the name Devil's Child, telling himself it was all he could ever be. But as he looked at Alina, frail, terrified, yet alive, he knew. If being a devil was all the world would grant him, then he would be a devil against the world. He raised his sword. Try. The clash that followed was like a thunderstorm breaking open. Steel rang, men screamed, and Eric cut through them like a beast unchained. Rage fueled him, but beneath it burned something sharper, something purer, protecting Alina. She fled behind the ruins, eyes wide with terror and awe as the legend of the Devil's Child was written not against villagers, not against the helpless, but against his own masters. By the time the sun rose, the ground was slick with blood. The captain lay broken, his throat crushed beneath Eric's boot. Only a handful of soldiers survived, scattered like crows, unwilling to test him further. Eric staggered, breath ragged, his body slick with wounds. His sword dropped with a heavy clang. When he turned, Alina was there, rushing to his side. "You fool," she whispered, voice cracking. "You've doomed yourself." His lips curled in something that might have been a smile, faint and weary. Better doomed than chained. And for the first time in years, Eric felt not like the Devil's Child, but like Joran's son again. The battlefield stank of iron and smoke. Bodies sprawled in twisted heaps, the last echoes of war groaning in the wind. Eric leaned on his blood-slicked sword, chest heaving, wounds stinging with every breath. He should have been dead 10 times over, yet rage and will had carried him through. Alina's hands, trembling but steady, pulled him away from the corpses. "We can't stay," she whispered urgently. "They'll come back with more. Whole companies, not just one band." Eric blinked, sweat and blood dripping into his eyes. "Then we run." They took nothing but what they could carry, his blade, a sack of bread and dried meat, and a ragged cloak Alina tore from a corpse to hide the chains still clamped to her wrists. Together, they slipped into the forest, leaving behind the smoldering ruin of the camp and the reputation that now hunted them both. Days turned into a blur of flight. Through brambles and rivers, across fields scorched by war, they moved like shadows. Alina led him through deer trails and farmers' paths, her childhood knowledge of the land resurfacing. Eric protected her from wolves, from raiders, from the nightmares that prowled the edges of night. At first, They spoke little. His silence was habit, hers caution. But silence frayed beneath exhaustion. One night, when they huddled beneath an overturned cart, the first words slipped out like sparks in the dark. "You saved me," Alina murmured, voice muffled against her knees. No one's ever chosen me like that." Eric stared into the embers of their fire, hands raw from gripping his blade. His voice was low, rough. "I didn't save you. I saved myself. If I let them take you, then everything my father taught me would be gone forever." Alina's head lifted, eyes searching his face. "Your father?" A long silence stretched. Eric had not spoken of Joran to anyone since the night of fire. The name caught in his throat like broken glass, but at last it slipped free. "He was all I had. They killed him in front of me. Since then, I thought there was nothing left worth holding on to." Her hand, still bruised by chains, brushed his. Not firm, not demanding, just a touch, tentative as a prayer. "Then hold on to me." Eric's chest tightened. He wanted to pull away, to retreat into the shell of the devil's child. But something stronger held him still. For the first time, he let her hand rest there, a fragile anchor against the storm that had carried him for so long. But war is never far. At dawn, the sound of horns carried through the trees. Soldiers, dozens, hunting. The survivors of the slaughter had returned with reinforcements. Eric rose in an instant, blade ready, but Alina grabbed his arm. "We can't fight them all." "I can." His voice was ice. "You'll die." He looked down at her, her hair tangled, her eyes fierce despite the fear trembling beneath them. For years, death had been the only promise he knew. But now, for the first time, life was something he wanted not for himself, but for her. "Then we run faster," he said. Through woods and rivers they fled, pursued by horns and hounds. Arrows hissed past, soldiers shouting his cursed name. "The devil's child," they cried, "has betrayed the army. He must burn." And as Eric pulled Alina through the thorns, blood streaking down his arm from a fresh wound, he realized the truth. The world would never stop hunting them. The only question left was whether he could outrun the devil they had made him. The forest could not shield them forever. For 3 days and nights, horns haunted their steps, hounds bayed in the distance, and the thunder of marching boots rattled through the trees. Eric and Alina pressed on until their legs shook, until even the rivers they crossed seemed to whisper of pursuit. On the 4th night, they reached the mountains, jagged cliffs of grey stone, their peaks swallowed by mist. A cave offered shelter, but little comfort. The air reeked of damp stone, and the sound of dripping water echoed like a ticking clock. Eric sat at the mouth of the cave, sword across his knees. His body was failing him. Cuts burned, bruises blossomed purple-black, blood loss made the edges of his vision blur. Yet his eyes never closed. He was a sentinel forged by pain, unwilling to let sleep steal Alina's safety. Inside, Alina tended what wounds she could. With strips of cloth torn from her dress, she bound his arm. With trembling fingers, she pressed moss against a gash in his side. "You'll bleed yourself to death if you keep pushing like this," she said softly. He did not look at her. "Better I bleed than you fall into their hands." Her voice cracked. "You can't protect me if you're dead." At that, his gaze shifted to her, slow and sharp. For a moment, Alina almost recoiled. The fire in his eyes was not human. It was the same fire she'd seen when he cut men apart without flinching, when he walked through blood as though it were rain. It frightened her. "Do you know why they call me the devil's child?" he asked, voice low, dangerous. Alina swallowed, but held his gaze. "Because they fear you." He shook his head slowly. "Because they believe I was born from hell itself. Because when I fight, I don't stop. I don't feel. I become something monstrous. And when it's over, when the killing's done, I don't remember if I was a boy once. Or if I've always been the devil they say." His hands tightened on the blade until his knuckles whitened. "I slaughtered my own. Men who fought beside me. I felt nothing when I did it. Nothing but the hunger to kill more." The cave fell silent but for the drip of water. Alina's breath trembled, but she did not move away. Instead, she crawled closer, placing her hand, small, calloused, trembling over his. Eric, she whispered, you feel now. His head snapped toward her, confusion darkening into anger. Do not lie to me. I'm not. Her eyes shone in the dim light. If you were truly the devil, you would have let them take me. You would have left me in chains, or worse. But you didn't. You fought for me. You're still fighting. That's not the devil. That's a man who still remembers what it means to care. The words carved into him deeper than any blade. His chest tightened, his throat ached. For years, he had buried Joran's voice, silenced it under rivers of blood. But in Alina's eyes, he saw the reflection of the boy who once clung to his father in a burning village. Not a devil. A son. The moment shattered with the blast of a war horn. Eric surged to his feet, sword drawn, as shadows moved at the tree line. Torches flickered through the mist. Dozens of them, perhaps more. The army had found them. Alina gripped his arm, her voice breaking. You can't fight them all. He looked down at her, battle fire already burning in his veins. I have no choice. Her fingers tightened desperately. Yes, you do. You can choose not to be the devil they made you. His breath caught. For the first time, her plea reached the boy buried beneath the monster. And as the soldiers closed in, Eric faced the greatest battle of his life, not against the army, but against the darkness inside himself. The soldiers poured through the trees like a black tide, torches and steel flashing in the mist. Their commander's voice roared above the din. Seize the devil. Bring me his head. Eric stood at the cave's mouth, sword in hand, his body shaking not from fear but from exhaustion. Every wound screamed, every breath cut like glass. Behind him, Alina clutched his arm as though her grip alone could tether him to life. The hunger stirred. The old, familiar rush of fire coursed through his veins, urging him to let go, to give himself fully to the beast within. If he surrendered, he could kill them all. He could drown this mountainside in blood. He could become the nightmare they feared. But he saw Alina. The terror in her eyes was not for the soldiers, it was for him. For what he might become. And suddenly, the choice was no longer about survival. It was about who he was. With a growl, Eric lowered his blade. The soldiers slowed, confused by his stillness. Their commander barked an order, and the line advanced. Eric stepped forward, raising his voice so the night carried it across the ranks. I am Eric, son of Joran. Not your devil. Not your monster. Just a man who was born into war. The words tasted strange, as though he were spitting blood, yet they rang like steel struck against stone. Laughter rose from the enemy ranks. Torches flared as men rushed him, their boots pounding the earth. Eric braced himself not for slaughter, but for sacrifice. He would not unleash the beast. He would meet them as his father would have, a man standing his ground. The first soldier lunged. Eric parried, the clash of steel shaking his weakened arm. Another came. Then another. He fought with desperate precision, not frenzy, each strike measured, each defense clinging to discipline. The beast howled inside, begging release, but he denied it. Blades tore at his flesh, blood soaking his tunic. His knees buckled, yet he did not fall. He carved a path not with rage, but with will. Behind him, Alina's cries were muffled by the storm of steel. And then, the horn sounded again. Not from the enemy. From the mountains above. Figures descended through the mist, cloaked warriors with painted shields. An outlaw clan, long hunted, long forgotten. Rebels who had lived in hiding since the wars began. Their leader's voice thundered over the battlefield. Stand down, or face us all. The enemy faltered, caught between prey and predator. The commander cursed, retreating with his men into the trees, torches snuffed one by one until the forest swallowed them whole. Silence fell. Only the drip of blood and Eric's ragged breath remained. His sword slipped from his hand, clattering against stone. He collapsed to his knees. The beast within clawed, furious, denied its feast. But for the first time, it was weaker than his will. Alina rushed to him, catching his face in her hands. Tears streaked down her dirt-stained cheeks. You chose, Eric. You chose not to be the devil. His chest heaved, his vision blurring. He wanted to speak, to say her name, to tell her she had pulled him back from the abyss. Instead, he let the silence answer for him. The rebels gathered, their eyes wary yet respectful. Their leader, a scarred woman with a voice like gravel, nodded at him. Not a devil. A survivor. One of us. Alina clung to him as the mist closed around the mountain. Eric felt the weight of his father's hand, imagined, yet real, rest on his shoulder. For the first time since the fire that stole his childhood, he was not burning. He was simply human. And that, he realized, was enough.